Hello, I'm Tom Kramer, Marketing Product Specialist for AGCO Hay Tools. Today we will be assembling a Farmer Series disc mower. This particular model happens to be a DM1309. The assembly procedure will be identical for all Farmer Series mowers. Step one, you can see we've already uncrated the mower. We have the cutter bar laid out on the bottom of the crate and most of the componentry already laid out and ready to assemble. As you can see over here, we have all of our loose componentry that comes bagged up, laid out on a cart, ready to be installed. And over here, we have our larger items, like the hitch, the curtain frame, and the curtain itself. One important thing to do is to lay the curtain out before you even begin to help some of the wrinkles unfold so it's easier to stretch over the framework to get it to fasten. Our first step for assembly will be lifting the hitch up right here with the hoist and laying it out to begin the assembly process. The next step is to install the hitch on the pivot arm, which is connected to the tube frame. After the hitch is slid onto the pivot arm, you'll then drop down this top piece, which holds the suspension spring. You'll drop it on top of the pivot arm and drive this roll pin through like so. The next step is to then hang the spring suspension rod. Okay, as you can see, we have the spring flotation arm installed in this welded slot here on the frame. You'll have to pull these two bolts loose and work one side of this piece out to slide the pivot pin in. Slide this piece back over, bolt it down tight, you're good to go. The next step is then to install the breakaway arm. The breakaway arm pokes through the belt housing and there's a welded bracket on the other side with a pin. Simply slide that pin through, drive the roll pin in, and that's set. As you can see, we've installed the spring-loaded breakaway arm to the hitch stock frame here. The spring will need to be removed. This piece will have to come off. The hitch will need to be put into place. This piece slid back over, squeezed tight, and then the spring and nut can be slipped over and tightened back down. The breakaway spring should be tightened so that the spring length is 4.8 inches, just under 5 inches. We install the jack. The jack simply has a pin with the roll pin. The pin slips through the frame, through the jack, and then the roll pin goes through and secures it tight. The jack should click into place if installed properly. Next, we installed the yellow PTO safety shield. There'll be 4 little bolts and nuts that poke through the front side of the belt guide here. Tighten them up, snug them down, good to go. As you can see, we've now installed the hitch pins. We want to make sure that we installed the category 2 size out, as most North American tractors are gonna have the category 2 size pin. If you're after a cat 1 size pin, then you would simply flip it over and drive the roll pin in the opposite way. Our longer pin, we want to make sure that the longer side is pointing to the outside of the hitch. That way the link arm connects right here and shoves the mower over further to the cutter bar side so that the back right rear tire of the tractor does not have overlap next to the cutter bar. The next step is to install the top 3-point arm. There'll be 4 bolts that bolt this arm to the hitch stock. 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll get torqued to about 100 foot-pounds. As you can see, we have the backbone for the curtain in the rear upper framework of the mower installed. You'll start by removing the top 3 bolts that are in this gearbox housing. Once these 3 bolts are removed, you can drop down the backbone, then slip these 3 bolts in and tighten and torque to spec. After that, you'll remove this breather hose from the plastic wrapping, pull it out, and tighten it here at the bottom side of the gearbox. After installing the breather on the gearbox end. You'll then come down to this end and install this rear support arm right here. This arm slips into a place, a pin drives through the cutter bar, and a roll pin drives down tight to secure it in place. You'll then set the top crop divider rod on, if you will, and 4 bolts hold the crop divider arm over the backbone and bolt it tight to this rear support arm. They sandwich together. There's a nice welded square piece right here that centers it up for you. Tighten it down, you're off to the next step. The next step is to install the swath guide wheel. These 2 brackets sandwich on the backbone of the cutter bar frame, and 4 bolts bolt it, clamp it tight to the backbone, and then the swath wheel arm bolts on to these 2 bolt holes right here on the bottom side. Make sure when you tighten them, before you tighten it down, you line the swath wheel up with the fin on the outer turtle shell, the outer turtle hat, for a good starting spot. This will need to be adjusted in the field depending on your crop conditions and desired windrow width. Okay, the next step is to install this deflector shield. There's a large pin down here that the pin slips through the shield, secures it in place, and then slips over this outside piece to lock it in place. You will then make sure you remove the cap from the hydraulic cylinder so you can extend the rod out and hook it up to the top slot of this deflector shield. The pin then comes through and the roll pin drives through to secure it in place. I forgot to mention you'll probably have to lift the tongue of the mower back up to give you clearance to get the pin in and the cylinder hooked back up. The next step is to install the main header flotation spring. You'll install the hook in on this weldment on the frame. The hook will come through the top side, the spring will stretch out, and the bolt will poke down through this pivot piece. And make sure that you install the nut on the bottom side, the lock nut on the bottom side. You want to tighten it down till you have a spring length of 29.5 inches. Once that's achieved, lock the nut down tight and your flotation is set. You'll then want to install the release rope. You install it on this locking mechanism right here, tie a nice tight knot, and run the rope up through the frame and through this little bitty hole. And then the rope will run up into the cab. You'll also then want to install the main hydraulic lift hose. The 90-degree fitting bolts on here at the end of the hydraulic cylinder, and then runs up, loops around, and then it'll plug into the auxiliary remote on the tractor. The next step is to install the curtain frames. As you can see, the bottom hole and the outer slots of the frame support is where the Allen head bolt goes. It tightens down tight and acts as a stopping point for the curtain once it pivots up and down. The curtain pivot bolt will go through this top hole with a bevel washer. Make sure you don't smash that washer down too tight to where the curtain doesn't pivot. As you can see, in this hole right here is the safety release bar. The safety release bar pivots with the back Allen head bolt that I just showed you. Make sure you sandwich it between here so that when you use the release tool to pry it out, the curtain will release. It basically acts as a spring-loaded lever whenever you drop it down into place. As you can hear, it just snapped to lock the curtain into place. Our last step we left at installing the rear curtain frame. We will do the exact same side for the front half when we install the curtain frame. After the curtain frames are secure, make sure you can use the release tool to lift them both up and down to make sure that they pivot freely. Remember not to tighten the bolts too tight as to not let the pivot frames move. After the frames are installed, we can drape the curtain over. Make sure that we drape the curtain over so that this cut end is facing up here towards the tongue of the hitch. You don't want to install the curtain on backwards. After the curtain's installed, we can then put on the clamp bars. It's easier if you use 2 people, but it can be done using 1 person if you start in the middle. There are 3 bolts that hold the clamp bar tight. It pinches the canvas onto the frame. There's 3 welded tabs on the bottom sides of the frame that the bolts stick through to bolt tight. Then on the back side, after the curtain is installed, you'll want to install your light assembly. Your light assembly bolts on so that the lights are facing the back, and you'll use the furthest hole to tighten the light assembly on. After you have the light assembly on, you install this clamping piece. This clamping piece has 2 big flat washers that clamp it tight to the curtain only. After that, you can run the electrical harness up, zip tie both the harness and the rope right here to the 90-degree angle on the hydraulic hose, and then run them around the back side. That way, when you fold the mower up and down, it'll give you plenty of slack for the hose and the rope and the electrical harness to pull through. After that, you're basically ready to hook up the tractor. Now remember, we hooked it up to where the category 2 pins were facing the outside, because more than likely in North America you'll be hooking to a Cat 2 tractor. If you have Cat 1, you can flip these pins over and use the inner slots. One of the last things is the PTO shaft. You do not want to install the PTO shaft yet, being as we don't know what tractor we're hooking the mower to. If the mower hooks to a different tractor, we'll have to cut the PTO shaft down to length. The PTOs come long from the factory so that they can be adapted to fit any tractor. So simply leave the PTO loose, or you can install it and hang it. But make sure whatever tractor you're putting it on, you cut the PTO shaft to length. After that, you want to make sure that you hit any grease zerks with plenty of grease per the operator's manual. After that, you're ready for the field. Thank you for joining us on our assembly of the Farmer Series 1309 disc mower. Remember that this assembly procedure is almost identical for all Farmer Series mowers. Thank you, and see you next time.